Hello and welcome to another episode of On Fire here on Daily Mirror Online. I'm Easwaran Rutnam. Our guest today is the former State Minister of Finance, and he's also a Member of Parliament representing the Samagi Janabala Vedia. Eran Wickramaratne, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Wickramaratne, I want to start off by asking you about the performance of the SJB at the recent election. Some expected something more than what we actually saw at the end of the day. Where did things go wrong, in your opinion?
First thing is, I don't think things went wrong. The SJB is a very new political party. It was just a few weeks old. Most of the time we were in lockdown, and then we were straight into a campaign. It was unexpected. We stepped out as SJB reluctantly. We stepped out of the SJB because we couldn't make the desired changes that we were hoping for years in the party that we all belong to. And it was basically internal democratization, you see, so that it would represent the wish of its members and the people. And that's why we actually stepped out, and we had a few weeks of campaigning. And I think for a party that's new, a party which hadn't a grassroots organization, a party which didn't have the adequate resources to do a campaign. I think we have proved that in a short few weeks, with the results, that we are the most formidable opposition in the country, and we will play our role.
But don't you think the rift in the UNP actually had some sort of impact on your election campaign?
Yes and no. It had no impact in the sense of it just showed that there was changes needed in the UNP, and that's why the performance of the UNP is what it is. But here it showed also that people were looking for an alternative path, and the SJB was providing that path. And certainly where the rift had an impact was on the final outcome in terms of the seats in Parliament, because a considerable number of UNPers, like about half of the UNPers, did not go to the polls. They didn't go to the polls, I think, primarily because they didn't believe that the UNP had a future. Secondly, they were uncertain that in a few weeks, a new party, the SJB, and our message probably couldn't be communicated into every household within a few days. And therefore, they decided to stay back. Maybe some thought that, after presidential election is concluded, that generally the parliamentary election results are historically predetermined to some extent, and probably that's why they kept out of the poll. So that does not mean that those voters are in any way supporting the government, not at all. You see, they stayed back from the poll, and I think the results have shown where the future is going to be, and I'm sure all of them will be with us. We are actually the inheritors of a movement started by D.S. Senanayaka, Barun Jatilaka, Arunapalan, and many other Muslim leaders as well. In 1946, that movement went forward, and then changes in keeping with societal changes did not happen more recently. And I think the SJB has proved that it is the inheritor of that political movement in the country.
So you wouldn't say that you would abandon the UNP voters, the followers who were expecting the UNP to continue at this election?
Far from it. Actually, this is a decision we took reluctantly. As I said, because we are an inheritor of a movement started long ago. And people for quite some time were telling us what exactly we should be doing. And it was a question about, do we stand with our own judgment, or do we actually follow the wishes of the people and the wishes of our members? And I think we took the right decision. I think the election results have proved it, and also it tells this country has hope. It needs a strong opposition as at present, and it also needs an alternative government in the future. And I'm confident that under Sajid Premdasa's leadership, given the quality of the people elected to parliament under the SJB, that we could form a clean, forward-looking government in the future, a government which will basically prize the rule of law, democracy and the rights of people. That is the alternative that the country needs.
And was there even a last-minute attempt being made to reach some sort of compromise with the UNP leadership?
This was an evolution of a long history. At a personal level, in 2018, after the local government elections, I strongly felt that somebody should be taking responsibility for the results of the local government elections. I was in the leadership of the party at that time, the treasurer of the party. I haven't said this publicly previously. I resigned that position because I felt strongly that democracy is not voters going once in 5 years, and casting a vote. That democracy must be more at the societal level. There should be internal democracy in political parties. Democracy must take root in our society. We all go to schools, there are old boys associations, old girls associations in these schools. And if you observe them closely sometimes, there's a fear of democracy. Sometimes they are those who are outgoing, wide leadership. Sometimes we want to propose those who will actually become the next group of leaders. And if suddenly from the floor there is a proposal, sometimes I look and feel like maybe some people are uncomfortable with it. So democracy needs to take root in society. And for it to take root, political parties must have internal democracy. This is not a feature in South Asia. Few political parties have democracy. So we took a decision that must reflect the aspirations of the people. And so it was an evolution, and we tried extremely hard to make the changes within the UNP. Mr. Wickramaratne appointed a committee headed by Eran Wickramaratne. It is called the Eran Wickramaratne report that was issued on democratizing the party. Those proposals were also on the table, but those proposals were not implemented. And it's now history, how Sajid Premdasa becomes a presidential candidate. It's history, how this JB is born. And now, we are on our way.
But, a lot of people are critical of Ranil Wickramaratne saying he was power hungry. Wasn't Sajid Premdasa also power hungry? He was fighting for this leadership role when he could probably have given in for the sake of the party and for the sake of the country.
I think that I don't generally get into the area of individuals' motives. Politics is about power. Politics is about using power for your personal benefit or using power for the benefit of society. And that determination as to an individual in politics, whether he's using it for his own benefit or he's using it for the benefit of society, is something that ultimately the public must judge. As to the two individuals you mentioned, I wouldn't make a judgment on them personally. I think the public should make that judgment.
But why, again, we have to focus on one individual at least. Why is Mr. Premdasa still the UNP deputy leader? Is there something going on which we don't know?
Mr. Premdasa was the UNP deputy leader. He is now the leader of the SJP.
So he has given up his post, or he has been removed from that post?
It's not that any of us have given up anything. I think it's inevitable that when you are in another political party and you're representing it somewhere else, that it depends on the constitutions of different parties as to whether you can hold positions elsewhere. So we're basically building the SJB. We are going forward with the SJB. We're always once the United National Party has resolved its own internal issues, we're always open to having a dialogue with them.
So you would be open to dialogue even if they appoint somebody else as UNP leader?
We're always open. It's not just the United National Party. All progressive forces in this country, democratic forces, law-abiding forces, right? We want to bring them together because we believe that the future of this country is in that alternative.
And in Parliament, assuming some action is initiated against Wickramaratne and those accused in the bond scam, would the SJB back such action?
I think the question doesn't arise in the sense that I think any action against politicians should be judicial action. We're totally against any political actions being taken against anyone. Anyone, we are opposed to it. It should be judicial action. The judiciary must be independent. The judiciary must pursue wrongdoers. The president in his policy statement said, one country, one law. But it was very evident that it's one country, two laws from the events that happened when a member of parliament who was convicted of murder was sworn in as a member of parliament. So that is the reason that we did not approve of that, because it should be one country, one law, not one country, two laws. Because it looked like one law for the citizens and one law for members of parliament, and this is very unsatisfactory. So I would say that whatever the scandal is, whether it's a bond scam or it's some other corruption issue, it should be decided by the judiciary. My request will always be, right, is that for those who are involved in judicial processes, it can be the private bar, it can be the Attorney General's department, it can be investigators, in the police, the CID, etc. Is that we need to quicken the process of investigation and quicken the process of justice. For the reason that I'm saying it is not to rush things and get some decision which is illegal, but because cases in this country, judicial processes are so slow, right? And lawyers will tell you, right? The people who have gone to the courts will tell you that cases take 10, 15, 20, 25 years to be resolved. And it's justice delayed, justice denied. And that process needs to be quickened. And I think the government has a role there, working with the legal fraternity and the judiciary, trying to see what can be done to improve that situation. So, judicial processes are the only processes that we must rely on, and in the events that happen in swearing in of a member who has been, or a candidate who has won an election and been sworn into parliament, is a decision for parliament, and it's a decision for the speaker. And everything can't be determined purely by law. There are judgments involved, there are precedents, there are previous similar cases. All that has to be taken into account. And then ultimately the speaker has to make a decision. And it's my view that the new speaker of the House actually made the wrong decision. Because in this case, judgment has already been given, you see. And then getting the person to take an oath after that judgment has been given is really a slap on the face of the judiciary and the judges who had actually made that determination.
And you spoke of cases. I'd like to go back to an assurance that the former government gave when it came to Lasantha Wickramatunga's murder, Thakurin's murder, and so many other incidents. Those cases also never really saw at least an end to the process. What happened there?
I can't tell you exactly what happened there because I have never been directly involved in these processes. I could only look at what happened and maybe come to some conclusions. Investigations were pursued, right? And particularly in some of these cases, investigations, I understand, could be quite complex. In some of the investigations, everybody did not cooperate, right? Sometimes the cooperation was less because it involved, right, the authorities, and it involved different arms of government, different arms of law and order and defense, right? And those institutions actually providing information, and that information did not come readily. What that suggests is that information is not coming readily, is that there could be political involvement. It suggests that. People are no fools, you see. Particularly in any case, if the police is withholding evidence, if the army is withholding evidence, the navy is withholding evidence, if the air force is withholding evidence, that there may be interference by political authority you see, who are overseeing those institutions, right? That is a conclusion that everybody will come to. That is natural, right? And therefore, some of these cases actually haven't been, investigations have been concluded for cases to be instituted. If you look at it globally, right, we have had situations like this globally, where governments in power, presidents in power, you know, people who have come sometimes through the ballot, but who have become autocratic, you know, in dispensing power, right, even in other countries of the world, right, that they have obstructed justice, you see, and sometimes justice has been delayed. I particularly remember Pinochet in Chile. I was a student, you know, in power, but it was decades later, right, that it was possible to actually bring him before the judiciary. I must say this, that we have a new generation of people, young people who have been born with the internet, with the mobile phone, young people who are more internationalized than my generation, young people who are more aware around the world, you see. Our generation has failed, but I have confidence in that generation. Even if justice is not dispensed in our time, for the leaders that we have had to live under, right, that pursuit of justice must never be given up, because it's in the interest of future generations. Other countries have pursued this sometimes decades later, and they have brought people who have ruled and who have had executive power, they have brought them to justice. And I have the confidence that the younger generation in this country will do that, so that we create a better Sri Lanka.
And being the main opposition in parliament, what does the Samagi Janabalabege hope to achieve over the next few months? Have you set yourself some sort of target and goal?
Yes, we have. Our immediate goal is, as we are a new political party, the group that I referred to, who did not go to the polls, we are going to actually meet them countrywide, and we are just put a plan in place to actually go and meet these people, you know, polling booth by polling booth, electorate by electorate, district by district in a very short period, and actually be able to communicate directly with them. It's a two-way process. We understand their aspirations, we understand their doubts, that's why they didn't go to the poll, and we also are able to communicate with them as to what we think the future is going to hold. So there is a very grassroots program, and we will pursue it. We will build the organization, we will reorganize ourselves, right? We will bring in new faces, right? This party is open to new faces, this party is open to change, and as Sajid Premdas has often said, you know, it's just not seniority, but meritocracy needs to be given a place in this party. So we'll be open to new faces, to new ideas, and we will go into this over the next few months. And we will be ready to face any election that will come.
And how will you face the 20th Amendment? That is probably the biggest and hottest topic for various reasons. How would the SJD face the 20th Amendment?
Well, we have already started by categorically saying that we are opposed to the 20th Amendment. The 20th Amendment is the response to the 19th Amendment. And the 19th Amendment was brought in a climate where a sitting president and an executive tried to accumulate more authority and more power. For example, he took away the term limits that were on the presidency. That's just an example. In no democracy in the world, right, can a president be there for a lifetime. In no democracy in the world. All humans, however clever, smart they may be, they all have weaknesses. Power corrupts as it goes, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that's why these checks and balances are there. And he did away with it. Not only that, there were other signals that were there. There were other realities that were there. In modern democracies, good governance is with the independence of the judiciary, from the legislature and from the executive. All three arms of government must be independent, one from the other. The Chief Justice of this country, the first woman, Shirani Bandaranaike, to sit as Chief Justice of this country, was unceremoniously removed within a few days, right? Which is just unheard of. Parliament removed her at the behest of the executive. And so the independence just disappeared. And clearly, right, they had Parliament because they had a family member sitting as Speaker, they had the executive, and now they had the judiciary as well because they had removed the person who should be sitting there in the judiciary and imposed someone who most people would obviously come to the conclusion is more favorable to them. So in that climate, right, and then if you take the historical evolution over a period of time, since the 1978 Constitution was promulgated, every presidential candidate said this is an authoritarian constitution, too much power in the presidency. That's Madam Sirimawa Bandaranaike said that, Chandrika Kumaratunga said that, Mahinda Rajapaksa said that. All of these people said this when they were running for president. All the opposition parties have said that. And they said the presidency or the executive must be answerable to the people and to Parliament. So the 19th Amendment, if you want, was a process. So the right to information was brought, the term limits were restored, the immunity of the president continues with the exception that he cannot violate fundamental rights. Right. Then the provision for bringing urgent bills, right, basically was amended. The 20th Amendment is bringing it back, and what that means is, with the 19th Amendment, if you bring a bill to Parliament, the government brings a bill to Parliament. First they have to gazette it, 2 weeks later they have to table it in Parliament, and then there's another additional week. Any citizen of this country could go to the judiciary and basically contest the fact that this bill is inconsistent with the constitution of the country. The urgent bill provision that they are bringing in with the 20th Amendment doesn't give the citizen that right. The president can go to the Supreme Court. The president gives the Supreme Court 24 hours. That means at 6 p.m. today, he gives the bill to the Supreme Court. By 6 p.m. tomorrow, they have to say whether this bill is consistent with the constitution or not. And as you know, law is complicated. There is the constitution to look at, there are the laws to look at, there's precedent to look at, international practices to look at, and sometimes in 24 hours you can't determine it. So the president has boxed the judiciary into the 24 hours, and then basically the bill can be brought into Parliament, tabled the next day, like we saw that they did, you see, the 18th Amendment, and they can at 5 o'clock in the evening call for a vote and pass it. The citizen has no role in challenging it. Some countries like the US and India have the provision that after a bill has been adopted and becomes an act of Parliament, that you could go to the courts and still challenge it for consistency, whether it's consistent with the constitution. Sri Lanka doesn't have that, post-legislative option of actually checking that. And what are they doing? We had a pre-legislative option at the bill stage. That is also being taken by the urgent bill provision. So there are lots of issues with this. Then there is the issue of the dual citizenship of this country, you see. I must say this up front, lots of Sri Lankans live overseas. And I do not question some of their loyalty for their country of birth. Lots of them have gone under very difficult and trying circumstances. They've been forced out of this country because of bad governance in this country. So I sympathize with them. Lots of them have profited out of their new circumstances. They've got education, they've got skills, they have become more internationalized, they have savings, they can invest and all, and certainly they should be welcome in this country. But however, having said that, right, where do we draw the line? If you are going to be the highest positions in the executive, that is the presidency or the cabinet, or in the legislature, that is parliament, or in the judiciary, I think that they must swear their first allegiance to this country. And therefore, if somebody is a dual citizen, they renounce the citizenship of another country and just become a citizen of Sri Lanka, so they are not unwelcome, they are most welcome to come here and to contribute, whether it's as president, whether it's in the legislature or in the judiciary. And I think they have to make that decision. Because if you represent two countries, and there's a conflict between two countries, right, where does your loyalty lie? That needs to be settled before they get into that particular position. So, we welcome them, but there is a process. What are these people trying to do? They're trying to compromise it, and they're trying to say, that doesn't really matter, so let's just take it out. So when you do things like that, naturally people come to the conclusion that you're doing it for personal reasons.
And I must ask you, even prior to the election, we knew, or at least people knew, what the president was going to do after winning the election. Yet most of them went and voted for him. They voted for Mahinda Rajapaksa's SLPP, and some of them, even quite influential people, well-known businessmen, came out and openly supported the Rajapaksas. Why do you think that was? Do you think that they had a good economic policy which maybe the SJB or the UNP at the time did not have, or is there something else?
If you put the election results in context, the presidential election, Sajid Premdasa polled 5.3 million votes, and Gotabaya Rajapaksa polled 6.9 million votes. There was a difference of 1.6 million votes. So one way to look at it is, if 800,000 votes switched, you would have had a different president. So that's one way that you can look at that result, right? So when you talk about the result, you need to remember that the president is in with a 52% margin. And if he fell back by 2%, right, then there would be no president, and then you would have had to go into a second count. The parliamentary election results don't reflect that for only one reason, that the SLPP vote didn't go up, it rather went down by a small percentage, but the vote for the UNP just went to virtually zero, right, and the SJB gathered half of that, so half of those didn't go to the polls. That's really the context in which this is, and when the traditional voters of these parties see exactly what is the alternative, right, and you have to view it from that point of view. So I would like to put that in context, the result, because the parliamentary seats don't really reflect that, right, and that's why I want to make sure, that that's the context. In terms of the economy, yes, Easwaran, what you said is accurate, that there was some disappointment, particularly among the business community in this country, that maybe that we should have done more, and so forth and so on. And I think that has two sides, and I could understand the frustration that some people went to. But if you look at it in context, right, if you look at it in the context today of 2017, in 2017 we had droughts in some districts of the country and we had floods in other districts of the country. Agriculture is a fairly big portion, not just of GDP. GDP, it could be small, but in terms of employment and so forth, it's a big component, and the effects of that in holding things back. Then the following year, what happens, right? There is a coup in this country. And I don't think there were many coups in the whole world, if you take a decade, you see, and it was a constitutional coup, you see, where the president dismisses a legitimate government and he swears in, right, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa. When a thing like that happens, naturally it raises suspicion whether there has been an understanding, in actually carrying out that coup. And the reason I say that is because there was a story, right, which looks like a fabrication now, that there was an individual called Namal Kumara, and this individual Namal Kumara, right, was going to assassinate President Sirisena and Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa. That was the story. The media, all the media played this up, unfortunately, right? And then people begin to think it's true, and the next, what's the result? suddenly the sitting Prime Minister Wickramaratne is dismissed and Mahinda Rajapaksa is sworn in, right? And then the people investigating some of those corrupt deals and murders, right, in the earlier period, right, investigators were arrested, right, immediately within days of this. And then, we go back, Parliament is prorogued, we go to the judiciary. The judiciary rules that this government is unconstitutional. And then, once they rule it, we go to Parliament, and I must mention Mr. Kalu Jayasuri, the Speaker, played a very important role, right, under very adverse circumstances. And if you saw the behavior in Parliament, it is unacceptable by any democratic norm, right, that people like Prime Minister Rajapaksa's party and members of it, right, could behave in the way they behaved in the House, right. And ultimately, Parliament showed that this government was illegal by actually showing that the previous government had the majority, and then it was restored. Now, why did I say that story? The reason I said that story is if you have a coup, economic growth takes a back seat, investment takes a back seat. Investors want to know, businessmen want to know whether the rule of law will be there. Not just in businessmen in this country, even overseas people. Then you go into 2019. In 2019, what happens? Right? There is an Easter bombing that happens in 2019. Right? And sometimes people connect this Easter bombing to the 19th Amendment, and they're trying to make a case out that it's because of the 19th Amendment. This is an absolute bunch of nonsense. It has nothing to do with the 19th Amendment. Because, right, law and order and defense, and basically the command of the three forces is the president of the country. The Easter bombings is nothing to do with the laws of this country. People try to hide behind laws and find excuses and so forth and so on. It has purely to do with the fact of leadership and management. A lack of leadership and a lack of management. Security Council had met, as we are learning now with the Presidential Commission. Right? The Prime Minister of the day was not informed. Right? There was the Deputy Defense Minister hadn't been sworn in as a Defense Minister of the country. There's a huge leadership and management issue there. The Easter bombings happened. Now, your question was on the economy. And why I reiterated these stories to you is that for any government to steer the economy under these trying circumstances is difficult. Despite that, right, we had positive growth right through. Right? Despite that, right, in 2017 and in 2018, we had a primary surplus in the economy. Since 1992, we haven't had it. We've had it in 63 years only once before, and then suddenly we have a primary surplus in the economy. The primary surplus is where revenues are bigger than expenditures. It's like the household economy. If constantly you're spending more than you are earning, at some point you're going to be in great trouble and debt, and people are going to call on your assets. But we had turned this around. If you look at the budget deficit, right, by 2018 it had come to 5.3%, the budget deficit in the country. Right? The macroeconomy was being very, very carefully managed. I could understand the frustration of business because of the confidence factors, sometimes decision-making delays. I can understand that. Then if you take revenues were 10.5% of GDP when we took office, it was 13.5% of GDP when we were going out of office. And why do I say that? Because if revenues come down, right, it's dangerous that basic government services cannot be provided. If basic government services are not provided, there could be a social revolution in the country. Sri Lanka has had cycles of violence. Right? We've had southern insurrections, we've had northern insurrections, and there is an economic component to all these insurrections. Right? And having that history, we needed to be mindful that we manage the macroeconomy very carefully, and we did that. What did this government do? They came around, they went around the country, and they said businessmen are being taxed. Businessmen like to hear that, so they heard it, and therefore we are going to basically do away with some of the taxes. What have they done? They've created a huge problem. And we don't know the exact numbers because the data is not coming clearly. 500 to 700 billion rupees, somewhere there, a loss of revenue. Right? And this is pre-COVID. All this is pre-COVID, right? What happened in the first quarter? In the first quarter of the year, right, from positive growth, right, of 3%, it went to 1.6% negative growth in the GDP. This is pre-COVID. This is not post-COVID. The second quarter growth numbers are not out. Second quarter growth numbers may be minus 2-digit numbers, right? The budget deficit is going up by at least 40%, right? If you take the foreign reserves of the country, right, in June 2019, we had foreign reserves of 8.7 billion, right? It's down to about 6.7 billion in June 2020, foreign reserves, right? I fear what could happen because there are debt repayments to be made. What's going to happen at the end of this year? We are going to see the largest budget deficit in 35 years of history in this country, right, at the end of this year, right? And this country is going to have an issue, right, really making its debt repayment obligations. And this is not to do with COVID. These decisions were all pre-COVID. This government's issue is that it has mismanaged the economy at the highest level. And what do? Right? Because they really didn't know how to manage this. They took it off the central bank. They basically shouted at the central bank. They forced 2 resignations of 2 eminent people on the monetary board, Mr. Nihal Fonseca, a banker, and Dr. Dushni Veerakoon, the IPS head. They forced their resignations. Right? They think that by changing people, right, that you can get the economy right. And I think going down this road is very dangerous, right? And I hope they don't just axe people at the senior level in the central bank of the country just because they can't get their act together and they're making the wrong decisions. Right? So it is really a mismanagement, choosing wrong policies. That's the issue. Post-COVID, it makes it great because most countries have responded to the post-COVID thing with a fiscal package. But if you have squandered 500 to 700 billion rupees, there is no fiscal package that you can offer. The monetary authority, the central bank, has done very well. The central bank has provided credit, right? But what's the real issue? The real issue is in May, in June and July 2020, there has been negative credit growth. No credit growth, despite the central bank making all this available, you see. So that is why you can't just have a monetary response to this issue. It's a combination of things. But if you make a mistake in really figuring it out, how to handle it in terms of policy, down the road you are going to reap it. Raghuram Rajan, the former governor of the Reserve Bank of India, whom I was fortunate to meet last year, who is now in Washington, he said this about the Indian economy. He said something to the effect of, don't fool yourself that you're going to have a V-shaped growth recovery. What you are seeing now is pent-up demand. And therefore, the pent-up demand in India, it was, I think, in the auto industry. That's what you are seeing, right? That people are producing because that is pent-up demand. The real question is, what's the demand for the future of your goods and services? And therefore, he cautioned the Indian government, basically, to look at the real issues in handling the economy. I heard spokesmen of the SLPP government in Parliament say, we are going to have a V-shaped recovery. This is absolute nonsense. We have seen pent-up demand, like for example in the garments industry, and that has helped us because exports have gone up. But let's not fool ourselves, right? It's the future demand that really is going to help us with economic growth, right? And therefore, if we recognize the problem in any issue, if you first recognize the problem and you admit that this is the problem that we are trying to resolve, then there's a much better chance of actually resolving it. So, I'm hoping that this government will actually change direction on the economy, and we will definitely support progressive measures that are brought to Parliament.
And on that note, we'll have to end it. Unfortunately, our time is up. Thank you, Mr. Wickramaratne, for joining us on this program. Until next time, have a good day.